Jen Zients is Head of Clinical Services and Deputy Director at the Brain Performance Institute, the translational research arm of the Center for Brain Health at the University of Texas at Dallas. She studies healthy cognitive function with an emphasis in high performance across the lifespan. And Jennifer obtained her Bachelor of Science degree from UTD at Austin, no, the University of Texas at Austin, and her Master's of Science degree at the University of Texas, Dallas. And I could say that we at KDC engaged Jennifer and her team probably 10 plus years ago, and it was a fascinating study. Just pleased to be with you this morning, Jen, and looking forward to your presentation. Take it away.
Thank you, Bill. Hi, everybody. I love this very cool day today. Is a nice warm or nice welcome change of pace. I wanted to really thank Lori, thank Bill, Kyle, thank you guys for sponsoring this, for inviting me, for moderating and making it possible. I love what I do, and so I'm excited to get to talk to you guys today, to give you some tools, but also to entertain questions that you guys have. All right, so I'm going to share my screen, so hopefully everybody can see this. All right, are we good? Good to go? Okay, fabulous. All right, so as we talked about, as Bill mentioned, this is called leading from the frontal lobe. And so for those of you who don't even think about or worry about your frontal lobes, you're going to have some new ideas when you leave here today, hopefully. So let me ask you first. Let's see, is this working? Okay. What do you think of when you hear the term brain health? If you want to add things into the chat, and if Lori and Bill want to read any of those things, or you don't have to at all.
Are we allowed to talk?
Oh, yeah, go for it. What do you think of when you hear brain health?
Mental health.
Mental health, all right. Who else? Okay, let me ask you guys this. When you think about brain health, do you tie it back to, I love that, it's like mental health. People tie it tightly to mental health. Do you tie it to your memory and how good your memory is? Do you think about, I'm able to track all the deals I've got going on? Do you think about, I've got all these clients, I'm able to keep all of them straight? I know exactly what I'm doing with each one. Do you ever think that it's about the absence of disease? Or is it something to which you really have never put much thought? That's what I think is super awesome, is that a lot of times we don't think about our own brain health. So we at the Center for Brain Health and the Brain Performance Institute are on a mission. We are on a mission to define, for some people redefining, but definitely to define what it is to be brain healthy. And so this is our mission here at the center, which is unlocking human potential through improved brain health and performance. I have spent a lot of my career doing assessments and trainings with individuals, and I have talked to thousands of people. And I think it's really interesting. What I find in general is people never think about their brain until something happens to it, or until something happens to the brain of someone close to them, right? And I always think that there's some good news and there's some bad news about that. I think that the good news is that our brains have incredible backup systems. They work incredibly well for us. We have invested so much. Everyone here has, I bet, a very robust cognitive reserve. We can talk about that later. But it's that you've put in so much into your brain through your education, through your hobbies, through the way that you engage in the world. And so you don't have to think about your brain a lot of the time because it works for you. The bad news about it is that we want people to be thinking more about your brain. Brain health is more than just the absence of disease. We don't want people to wait until something happens, until you start addressing your brain health. Imagine if you started brushing your teeth when you were 65. How would that be for your mouth, huh? right? So for us, brain health is about performance. It goes beyond just the health of our brain. It's important. Of course, we want to stave off disease as much as possible, but it's about performance and helping people to optimize their performance based on what they need their brains to do and what they want their brains to do. So when you leave here today, one thing I want you to take with you is I want you to start making your brain top of mind. All right. So as Bill mentioned earlier, this whole talk is called Leading from the Frontal Lobe. And so what is the frontal lobe and why is that so important? So for some of you that know about frontal lobe and frontal networks and functionality, I'm gonna give you a little refresher. For those of you who don't, I want you to become familiar with what I'm hoping is gonna become one of your favorite body parts, all right, your frontal lobe. So some fun facts about your frontal lobe. So right here's a picture of your brain. The blue part is your frontal lobe. Your frontal lobe is the last part of your brain to fully mature. It doesn't fully mature till in our late 20s. It is the first part of our brain to decline, even in normal health. A lot of that is driven by autopilot. When you stop challenging yourself, we can be at risk of decline. Our frontal lobe is responsible for decision-making, problem-solving, judgment, reasoning, working memory, attention, inhibition, impulsivity. It is the thing that works with information that we get. It's not about collecting information. It's about what do you do with the information that you have collected. It is so powerful. It is like the big powerhouse. It has the vastest amount of connections throughout your brain. It is also highly vulnerable to lots of factors, some of which we have control over and some of which we don't. Things that can make our frontal lobe vulnerable are sleep deprivation and fatigue, familiar, alcohol, drugs, even prescription drugs, different diagnoses that we have, different medical conditions can affect our frontal lobe function. Working too hard, not working enough, chemotherapy, radiation, certainly concussion, stroke. There's lots of things, stress, depression, and anxiety. All of these things have an ability to impact your frontal lobe. But what we're starting to learn in science is that the stronger you build this frontal lobe, the more resilient it is to those factors if and when they come your way. All right. So I just wanted you to meet your new favorite body part, your frontal lobe. All right. So neuroplasticity. Probably all of you have heard about neuroplasticity. How we engage our frontal lobes is what helps us to drive neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is your brain's constant rewiring. And so here's just a visual representation of some neurons that you can see there's an increased wiring going on, increased connectivity, right? Your brain is undergoing neuroplasticity all the time. In fact, right now, you have the ability to be engaging and leveraging neuroplasticity as you listen and learn and try to onboard some of the information that you're getting. We can wire our brain in healthy ways, but certainly neuroplasticity can also work in negative ways, right? We can do it in very maladaptive ways. So how you take in information and what you do with it or don't do with it is what determines whether or not you have good or bad neuroplasticity. And so neuroplasticity, as you can see here, it's really about the integrity of the brain, like the physical state of your brain. But brain health also encompasses just performance in general, right? And so one of the ways that you can look at performance is through something that our chief founder and director, Dr. Sandy Chapman, kind of coined this term, brainomics. This is something everyone in the business world would kind of relate to probably. It's the economic benefit of having maximum, or maybe I should really say optimal brain performance versus the cost of low brain performance. So each of you knows all the time, every day, you know, our brain goes forward and backward every day. So you know that if you didn't get great sleep last night or you really don't feel so well, you may not be your sharpest. You may have lower brain performance today than you did yesterday. And certainly you're not as productive. Things don't move as quickly. You're not on top of everything as well as you could be. That's an example, a very personal example of brainomics. But also I think that there's an idea about how it translates into dollars. And so we're going to talk about that in a second. One of the things that can, even if you do feel good and you feel like you're on top of the world, we can also just environmentally have low brain performance because of factors that go on. And so, quite interesting, we were talking to people and asking them, we've asked a lot of people, what's an obstacle to your optimal brain performance? Anyone? Can you give me any examples or think about what is an obstacle to your optimal brain performance?
Lack of sleep.
Lack of sleep. Okay. Anyone else?
Too much going on, bandwidth.
Okay, good.
Worrying.
Worrying.
And
Yep.
worrying.
Very good. I know, especially, yeah, I mean, always, but especially now, it seems like there's so much unpredictability.
Diet.
Diet?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. So interestingly, one of the most common things that people say is an obstacle to their optimal performance is difficult people. The second thing people talk about is literally being interrupted and distracted all day long. Anyone relate to that?
Absolutely.
Absolutely, yeah. So let me ask you, and you guys can answer this or not, how long can you work without being interrupted or distracted? How many minutes?
I timed this once. It was somewhere between 4 and 7 minutes at the office.
Excellent, yes. You're right on target because,
And that's only if I turn my email off.
okay, fair, exactly. So there's some research that has gone on looking at people in offices. So office workers, on average, can work for about 3 minutes before they are interrupted or distracted. And that is, to your point, email, phone, people just stopping by for a quick second, just got to ask you a quick question, stays for a little bit longer than that. But then what happens is it takes you, surprise, surprise, it can take 20 to 25 minutes to get cognitively reoriented to where you were. So you are thinking, you are deeply, you're thinking about a deal you're working, you're thinking about a conversation you're having, you're knee deep in like a complex email or a spreadsheet, numbers, finances. You get interrupted, you go deal with that, and now you have to come back to that, but your entire thinking has been disrupted. And it can take 20 to 25 minutes. So every single time today that you're interrupted by something, imagine that time that we are wasting, that we could be just, if we had single focus and we didn't have distractions. Now, distractions and interruptions are a normal part of life. So I'm not saying like you can't ever do that, but there are some tricks and tools to help minimize that. But I think it's really important because distractions cost us a lot of time and a lot of money and a lot of qualitative complaints. So this was a kind of a qualitative and quantitative survey that was done by Harman IE a couple years back, and this is looking at just corporate America. Distractions and interruptions alone can cost businesses over $10,000 per year per person. That's a lot. But, for me, yes, bottom line matters. I'm also very interested in the qualitative report that people give, is that when we are being interrupted and we're being distracted, people have difficulty working and producing. They don't have time to think deeply. There's information overload, which some of you were talking about, not having enough bandwidth, too much going on, missing deadlines, having angry people, losing your job, not having a good work evaluation, but also a lot of conflict can come out of this. So when you're trying to do too many things at once, you're not doing anything to strengthen your brain. You're actually working against it. Okay, so how we use our brains, as I said earlier, is what's going to help our neuroplasticity. And we want to be wiring to good things so that when we do bad things and we have bad habits, at least we'll be more resilient for it. So I'm going to give you guys some challenges. I'm going to ask you to think and to do some practice stuff with me. So I want you to ride along. I am going to give you a challenge right now. I'm going to show you, when I go to the next slide, you're going to see it's a lot of language. What I want you to do is I want you to read it. It's some really quite interesting research about marijuana. At the same time, I'm going to be reading something to you. And I want you to pay attention well enough so that you can answer questions about both things. So I know how much time you guys all do spend in the car talking on the phone. We all do. Or in meetings doing your email, or in a conference call on your email, or all these things, right? So our brains are pretty used to toggling back and forth between things. Let's put it to the test. Let's take it for a drive. All right, here we go. So as soon as I put this on, I want you to start reading. For centuries, physicians believed that sleep was a period of brain inactivity, yet research over the last 60 years has shown us that the brain remains active during sleep. There is a progressive decrease in the activation or firing rate of most neurons throughout the brain as sleep progresses from wakefulness to non-REM sleep. Also, the patterns of neuron firing change from a seemingly random and variable activity pattern during wakefulness to a much more coordinated and synchronous pattern during non-REM sleep. In all mammals and many other animals, sleep can be defined in much the same way that we define sleep for humans. However, there are some notable differences among species. When humans sleep, the entire brain is involved. Dolphins and whales, on the other hand, need to maintain consciousness while they sleep so that they can occasionally surface to breathe. In these marine mammals, sleep occurs in only one hemisphere of their brain at a time, allowing for some degree of consciousness and vigilance to be maintained at all times. All right. So here goes your challenge. You ready? I want you to answer these questions. So anybody who can answer these questions, just shout it out. What circuitry of the brain was marijuana shown to disrupt? What were the two categories of visual stimuli that were used in the study you read about?
Songs and pipes.
What happens to neuronal activity during non-REM sleep? How many total participants were in the marijuana study?
70? 70?
And why do whales have a different sleep pattern?
Because they have to stay conscious so they don't die.
Good. Very good. What are 3 brain regions that are associated with reward? All right. Did anyone get those right? All of those right?
Nope.
What was that an example of, or an illustration of? What was I asking you to do?
Multitask.
Multitask. Now, how many of you came here just 3 minutes ago thought, yeah, I'm a good multitasker, and now you realize that really there's a cost to that? I hope, do you guys see that?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Our brains, even though, 20 years ago and 15 years ago, probably, we did believe that multitasking was something that was very healthy for us, that the more we did with our brain at the same time, we must be wiring to more and better and stronger systems. There is overwhelming evidence now that multitasking is toxic for your brain. It is not just that it's something you shouldn't do, it's toxic to your brain. So when we talk about wiring in maladaptive ways, constant multitasking wires in maladaptive ways. All right? So your first tool that I want you to walk away with, the very first thing, come on, slide, is less is more. I want you to remember that less is more. And so your tool is I want you to minimize your multitasking. All right? Even if you decrease it by 10% today for the rest of the day, you are going to be enabling your frontal networks to perform at more optimal levels rather than making them work in a divided attention. Our brains are excellent at toggling back and forth between things. And I'm sure all of you have been on conference calls while you're also on your email and you're not paying attention, and then somebody asks you a question and it's like, it was bad connection. What? Could you repeat the question? But you really weren't paying attention. We all know it, right? So I want you to be able to think about it like that. Multitasking is something that is toxic for performance. We're slower. We make more errors. Everything is, shallow in our thinking. We can be more irritable and agitated. But also when we multitask, we're building a highly distractible brain. So I've seen a lot of adults over my life over my career that will come and say, I think I have adult onset ADD. And not to say that doesn't exist, but a lot of times it's by how we're using our brain and what our brain's wiring to. So if you are constantly toggling back and forth between things and you're constantly trying to pay attention to multiple inputs at the same time, your brain does not have the capacity to do that. And instead, what you're building is a highly distractible brain, all right? Something that doesn't deliver well. Okay. Any questions about less is more? Good?
I do.
Yes, ma'am.
So building a highly distractible brain, meaning we're giving ourselves ADD?
Yeah, basically.
Because we're teaching ourselves to go from one thing to, oh my.
So when you talk about, were you the one that recorded yourself, that timed yourself from 4 to 7 minutes?
Yes.
Okay. I want to ask you and everyone, you know, the number one distractor is actually what goes on in our own head. And so sometimes if you are to stop and think, how many times do I actually distract my own self? Because I'm working on something, I'm thinking about something, and then these ideas pop in my head. We can download those and write them down, or we can like kind of pursue them or ruminate over it a little bit. That's a distraction too. We are building that kind of system where people are not able to concentrate. So even if you have space to concentrate and focus on a task, a lot of people now are not able to focus for more than 15 or 20 minutes without having to get up and do something different. And that's because we're training our brain to be that way. Crazy. All right. So let's go on to like the second section, shall we?
Jen, can I ask a question real fast?
Yes, ma'am.
Before all this distraction, what is the ideal time to be able to focus? Like reading a book in a vacation or working at your desk or whatever.
All right. So number one, I think, I don't know if that there's an ideal. What we are seeing is that on average, people who have people with healthy brain function, so we do end up petering out a lot of times after about an hour of something. So we know that, and I'm not talking about like when you get into a flow and you know, you are really going and you've got it going. I see a lot of people, and you probably all of you have been engaged in something where it's like, all of a sudden you look up and it's hours have passed and you're like, wow. So one of the things that we recommend is trying to do things in 45-minute amounts of time, whether it's tasks or meetings, rather than having things for an entire full hour. Because the other part of this is that your brain needs a break. And so most of the time when we have meetings, I mean, you think about how many times you go to like an hour-long meeting, and when do people's phones start coming out, if phones are allowed in the room? As soon as phones start coming out, you know, people are like, they're not paying attention anymore. And so number one, I think that tells us that sometimes we're going too long, but also people need to be able to, we need to think about how can we get more done in less time to be more efficient, and being very goal directed, having people do, you know, not coming to a meeting with like, not knowing what the agenda is, but knowing this is what we're going to be talking about. Everybody come with your 3 to 5 ideas already thought about beforehand. That way you can have a meeting where it's much more efficient because you can talk about what you've thought of and iterate on that and improve on ideas rather than trying to brainstorm. Brainstorming ideas rarely, they don't always lead to really good ideas. So I would say if you could think about your day, and when I say 45 minutes, I'm saying within 45 minutes, there's a lot of tasks you have. If you would look at your to-do list and say, how much time and energy am I willing to give to this task? Or how much should it really take if I'm not being interrupted and if I'm not multitasking? If you can figure out how to get some of those things done in 45 minutes, within 45 minutes, or to chunk it, so what is it that I can accomplish within that period of time to move the ball forward? You may not complete the entire project, the entire initiative, but at least you would have moved it forward. There's some other brain health benefits to that. And some of that is in the way of dopamine, and you're getting rewarded. So trying to think, rather than having these long stretches, thinking about more in blocks, a 45-minute period of time. And I'm also not saying don't set a timer for 45 minutes And then at 45 minutes, ding, and then now you've just interrupted yourself again. So, you know, I think it's part of it. And we can talk about this again a little bit later. But rather than longer spurts, I think shorter spurts are good, but that are focused spurts. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, any other questions before we go on to the next? Okay, cool. So now what I want you to do is, and I'm not going to give you something like stimulus, but I want you to reflect on your own performance. I want you to be thinking just about your own performance. And we're going to do that through the lens of what we call transactional, or really what is transactional execution versus a more transformative experience. Okay, so I'm putting this up here. I'm sure you all know, but I'm going to have a disclaimer. Your brain does not look like this. We are not a left brain and right brain person. We are an all brain people. We need both sides of our brain to function. So for all of us that think, well, I'm a left brainer, I'm a right brainer because I'm more analytical or I'm more creative. In fact, both parts of your brain are working to make you have those talents. So I just like the visual depiction because I think it kind of helps to illustrate what I mean when I say transactional versus transformative. All right. So when I'm talking about transactional, what I'm talking about is our reliance on experience, your own knowledge, that you're functioning within existing boundaries, you're following specific processes and procedures, all within like some specific structure that's directing you toward your goal, right? So already kind of more blocked out, more planful, already planned. These processes and procedures are in place. There's a lot of things that are really important in our lives that we follow in a transactional mode. But when I'm talking about a transformational experience, what I'm talking about is more of a change-oriented mindset. Something where now you're relying on like past mistakes and knowledge and new information that you're getting to help you generate big picture ideas and to understand how those ideas apply not only to this situation at hand, but more broadly. Like thinking if you make a recommendation to a client or you're having a conversation with your kiddo about, and you're trying to give advice, what are the second, third, and fourth order effects of those things, right? That's more transformative. But just saying, you know, just having like the rote answer to something, that's an example of transactional. And so our brains need to operate. We need to be able to do both of these things. And it's really good. But transactional is reliant on posterior parts of your brain, things that are well learned. You don't really need a lot of effort to go into it. It takes time, but it doesn't take the same amount of effort. Transformative thinking is engaging your frontal networks, okay? This is where we're thinking, how do we come up with new solutions to things? It is much more effortful. And the more that people think in transformative modes, the more automatic it becomes. So it does actually become easier, but what you're doing with your brain is you're making it more efficient in terms of novelty, okay? And thinking, when I say novelty, not seeking out novelty, but coming up with good novel decisions, options, solutions, being able to see things in new ways, okay? So transactional and transformative are really important, but we're gonna really think about transformative right now. Okay, so back to your own performance. What I want you to think about is, think about an important task that you're responsible for, that you do, that you execute in a transactional mode, that you don't really put a lot of thought into, that you know how to do it, and so you have a confidence and you rely on your skills to do it, and you don't really have to think a lot about it. Now, I want you to think about what the impact would be if you did that if you had an approach to it that was more transformative, where you were thinking more deeply about it. So let me give you an example, because I'm sure some of you are like, what are you talking about? This is actually something that comes from this industry, actually courtesy of Lindsay Wilson and Corgan. We've gotten the great pleasure to partner and collaborate with Lindsay and her group. And through this, I've really gotten to this appreciation of flex space. So I'm sure all of you guys, so I'm just going to throw out that as the example, right? So imagine, right? Somebody comes to Corrigan and they're like, we need you to help us recreate space. And the client comes and they're like, we just want all open space. Like, we know that's the thing. Everything's just open space. We want it to be collaborative. We want everybody to collaborate. And so the transactional execution could be if Lindsay were to come up and say, all right, that's what you want. No problem. We're going to do it. No problem. But a transformational approach could be that the team knows, this flex space, like understanding their client's business, their client's staff and their own team, presenting this as an option would probably already be a shift in transformational thinking rather than transactional thinking. In order to do that, Lindsay and her team they would have to engage these transformative skills of understanding what the flex space can offer and how that could directly apply to their client. So it's not just always just delivering what the client wants, but it's trying to help improve the client's space and the way that maybe the client operates by offering something a little bit different. What do you think about that? Does that make sense?
And then, hey, it's Lindsay. And then you tell them it's the brain science, the reason that they need to. Because there's lots of people who know this on the call. But I use the brain science as part of the argument.
Right. So it's like, why? Well, it's really good. It's much better for your brain. Totally. I think, I worked with a long time ago. I worked with a real estate broker, and he gave me another example where he said, he just felt like he had so much going on. This has been probably 8 years or more ago. But he's like, so much is going on. And so transactionally, when his client was looking for a new space, he just like pull a bunch of properties and just drive his client, or meet his client all of these different places. And then, he went through a training with us and he thought, you know what, I'm going to do this a little bit differently this time. And he started listening and really understanding to what the client was saying. And he was making his own interpretations. And so instead of just pulling a whole bunch of properties, he cut down to a few choices. And then he presented these different options and to why they could potentially be a good match. He said it completely transformed it, even though the research side of it may have taken longer to think through. The tactical visiting of these spaces and looking at everything, it cut down on the time of that. And it made the whole process much more efficient for him. And he felt like he was more effective. So I want you guys to be thinking about that for yourselves, because what's really important out of this, and the tool that I want you to walk away with, it's being transformational, or otherwise said, taking a deep dive into information and issues. And I think this is really important too with even our conversations that we have at home. How often do we sit and just listen to what our spouse or our kids or our friends or our parents are saying? And a lot of times it's just like, yeah, because it's, it's very transactional that we have these very transactional conversations. But how can you engage in deeper ways? This deeper dive that you're taking by being a more transformational thinker engages your frontal lobes. It builds stronger networks. So if somebody's like, why are you engaging me in these kinds of questions? You use what Lindsay said, and you said it's the brain science. Okay? All right. Does anybody have any questions about this? No? All right. So let's do another challenge, shall we? All right, this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you when I switch the slide, you are going to see a picture. And I want you, if you have a pen and paper, I want you to jot some stuff down. I want you to jot some ideas down. If you don't, then think in your head about them, try to keep count and try to keep a qualitative idea. But if you have a pen and paper, just grab that real quick. I'm going to give you about 30 seconds. And I want you to write down as many one-word themes as you can that describe or kind of talk to the picture that I'm about to show you. All right. So there are no right and wrong answers. I don't even have really a good example for you. I'm trying to think of one, but everyone in here, a theme is a concept. That's what we're looking for. Just think about this picture conceptually. and try to capture it in a one-word concept. All right? Here we go, 30 seconds. All right. Everybody you have your words down? Count up your words. So just see from quantity, how many different words did you get? And then we're going to kind of look at, I'm going to give you some examples, and I just want you to be thinking or reflecting back on what were the concepts you came up with, kind of where do they fit? So again, there's no right and wrong answer. It's really for fun, but it's also a very practical way for us to talk about divergent ideas. Okay? All right. So first, did your list of themes, of one-word themes, look a little bit like this, where maybe, group or teamwork or cohesion, right? So some of you probably came up with words that were, or had a lot of words that were about the group of birds, right? That were on the right side of the picture, and concepts about that. Or did you have words that looked like this, where they were like pioneer, trendsetter, individualism, right? So these words really described more of that bird that was sitting alone, right? Or did you have, were your words single focused, looking at just one thing? Or were you giving words that described both? Were you able?
I had both.
You had both, okay. What about everybody else?
One
Okay,
side.
Focused on one.
Okay.
Both.
Mine was both.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so what is this all about? Why am I asking you to kind of look at a picture and come up with one-word things and think about this? The whole idea is what brings us to this third tool that I wanted to talk to you about, which is all about perspective taking, okay? Perspective taking is part of being an innovative thinker. So innovation, we use the term innovation a lot. And I think all of us in your industry, innovation is very important, to be innovative, right? Innovation takes on tons of forms. It's everything from being like Steve Jobs and Elon Musk of the world to just figuring out how to now open up a cabinet that lost its handle, right? And like, how am I going to rig up some apparatus so that now I can make my own homemade handle? It's the biggest things to the smallest things. From a cognitive standpoint, innovation is equal to flexibility of thinking. And the more flexible our thinking, the better. We are building, again, going back to those frontal lobes, we are building stronger systems, but we're also working toward more improved, efficient neural exchange of energy, so neural efficiency. And what I mean by that, neural efficiency, is that the amount of energy that two of your brain cells, your neurons, require to execute a task, the easier. There's less energy that these neurons have to exchange when we are more innovative, when we are more fluent, when we are more flexible in the way that we see things. So it's super cool because I think we all can come to the table, we have, certainly I showed you that picture and it's like, some people focus on one aspect, you focus on another. How easy is it for you to look at both sides? We may not do it automatically, but if you intentionally train yourself to, now I've looked at something, now I'm going to look at the other side, this is something that will become a much more automatic way of thinking. Perspective taking is really important because I'm not trying to say that you need to convince somebody to your point of view, or that you need to be convinced and you need to agree with somebody that you don't agree with. But I also want you to have, it's a deeper level of understanding than just agreeing to disagree. And I think right now there's so much, things are so divisive, you know, I mean, politics aside, things are very divisive, but also just even with COVID and all this different information, and we have this information, then we have this information, and people get upset because we were told the wrong information. And it's even just being able to take a step back and look at the different perspectives of who's coming to the table and what do they have to offer. This is something that you guys probably practice all the time, whether you realize it or not, is when you're working with clients and thinking about what are their goals. But also the thing we were talking about, again, like transactional and transformative, is if we let our clients, if we have our clients coming to us and giving us, but we already think that we know what they want or we know what they need, then that isn't very flexible in our thinking. But being able, even if you think you know what they need or you think you know what they want and they say something else, being able to see all these sides is what helps with perspective taking. And it's what makes us more innovative, as I said. So it's important because diversity and inclusion, you know, some of the initiatives of Empower of this group, this is another aspect to that, is the more that we open up our aperture to be able to appreciate all the different points of view that exist, we are building stronger relationships. We are able to, like this whole social implication of innovation and perspective taking is pretty significant. This is also something that just in general helps us to build not only, you know, we can be very sympathetic, we can have compassion for, we can have empathy for people and feel empathy, but compassion, perspective taking also enables us to be more compassionate. And I think right now, certainly, you know, I look at my kids who have been virtual learning. How is it that we're trying to understand what their point of view is? Now some of my kids are back in school, some of them are not. And it's confusing for them. I think about my mom who's alone. I think about her perspective. You know, I'm so busy in my own world. I'm working double time, trying to work from home, trying to be a working mom and a good wife and a good friend. It can be really hard sometimes to take other people's perspectives, and we can get really like lost in just our own stuff. But if we'll exercise this, the more that you do this, the better. So one of the questions, you know, that I asked you is like, how many different words did you give? This fluency, the quantity of ideas you come up with, that's really important too. So it's about taking both, you know, being able to see all sides, but it's also about how many different ideas do you come up with. And even though you don't go around looking at pictures and writing down all these one-word themes you come up with, we are routinely presented with problems that we need to be open-minded to and that we need to be able to come up with multiple solutions. A former colleague of mine used to always say, my first thought is the worst thought. Just meaning that, you know, I'm going to make a decision. Here's my decision. Let me be proactive and intentional about coming up with more ideas to see what else I can harvest out of the situation or my knowledge or my experience or my mistakes that I've had or other people's points of view, other people's inputs. When we practice this fluency, the fluency is one of those things that really drives that neural efficiency. So it's not like just coming up with like a bunch of like low level dumb ideas. It's also, I mean, some dumb ideas are good, but it's also thinking about what's practical. So that's why you have to do some deep dive. Like all of these tools, they really do work together. If you don't have the ability to deep dive into it, then we could be losing a lot of capacity from a cognitive perspective. Okay, does anybody have any questions about perspective taking? No? Silence. Okay, all right. Then I'm gonna go to the next thing. Now, I've given you 3 cognitive tools, right? Less is more, which translates to less multitasking. Today, if you will try to reduce your multitasking by at least 10%, or think about if you have any of your conference calls you have today, stay totally focused on that conference call. just one conference call. Do not be doing anything else. That will be a reduction in your multitasking. Taking a deep dive, being more transformational in your thinking. When you single task and you cut your multitasking, you are better able to take a deep dive. And perspective taking. When you are not being interrupted, when you're not multitasking, you're taking a deep dive, it also enables you to go and be a wider perspective taker. Really, really important. So these 3 cognitive tools you can put into play today. But I also want to share with you some research, because this is going to probably ruffle some feathers, I know, but I want you to know some of the research on this. And that is research on our beloved smartphones. Okay. Yes, our smartphone is our 5th appendage, right? It's our second brain. Many of us think of it as our second brain. You are probably heavily reliant on it for business. It is the thing, especially now, it keeps us connected to friends and family when we have physical distancing limitations. This technology is awesome. It is absolutely, it's fantastic, but it is also a massive source of brain drain. And I think of technology as something that we should be driving rather than allowing it to drive us, all right? So the tools I just gave you are not effective, and they're not even possible to utilize if you don't put down your phone on occasion. You have to be able to put down your phone for at least a little bit of your day in order to engage these tools, okay? So let's just talk about this study. There was a study, this was done at UT Austin, and what they did was they had people with their phones, they had people put it in their desk, or put it like in their pocket. A lot of us keep it in our pockets, or they had them put it in the other room. And what they saw was that when your phone is in the other room, your working memory capacity was higher and your fluid intelligence was higher. So for those of you that don't know what your working memory is a frontally mediated cognitive skill. It is kind of your computational workspace. So let's say back in the day before smartphones, when somebody would leave you a message and say, please call me back at, and they leave their phone number, you would rehearse that number over and over again, you hang up, you pick up the phone, and then you dial it, and then you dump the information out. But it's also very practically now when we're on phone calls or on conference calls, we get some information, we kind of figure out in our head what to use it, and then we dump it. We're not always trying to store it for long-term use. That is an example of working memory. It's a thing that enables you to look at your calendar for the day and know, you may not remember everything very specifically, but you know, I've got a webinar at 11:30. I know I've got a meeting at 3. I've got another meeting at 4:30, even if you have to look up specifics later, but that's like the prospective way to look at it. Your fluid intelligence is really your reasoning skills. And over our life, our reasoning skills can go up or they can go down. And so even though people, we're constantly adding to our ability to reason and our ability to come up with good solutions and conclusions, if you are constantly attached to your phone, you can see that it impacts it in a negative way. So even just having it like in your pocket, but having it at your desk, and your working memory capacity even more. And this is part of that, to that point, I think it was Francis that was asking about the distractions. This is a perfect example. We don't have good working memory capacity. We're building a more distractible brain. And technology can be one of those drivers if we are letting it drive us rather than us taking it where we need it to go and how we need it to work for us. So this is something I want you guys to know, just because I think we're all heavily reliant on it. But if you need your optimal performance for things, you're going to do yourself a great favor if you put your phone away, preferably in the other room. One thing I recommend, even if you're like at work, I cannot do that, no way. When you come home at the end of the day, or when you go into your kitchen from your dining room office now, for a lot of us, if you'll go in and you just leave your phone behind and have uninterrupted conversation with whoever is there, friends and family, you'll also be doing your brain a favor, and you'll be exercising this and using this research as a tool for yourself. Does anyone have any questions about that? Is that surprising to anybody?
I knew that
is.
these things distracted us, but I didn't know how bad it was. I don't think I knew what extent.
Yeah, I agree.
Agreed.
Right.
Totally doing all of the things that you're telling me that I'm not supposed to be doing.
So I know, I think that again, it's like thinking about your brain, you know, it's like, and still yet your brain still works for you. But what about, are you working at optimal levels? And if you stopped doing some of these things and kind of filtered that out and decided, I'm going to not do those things, what could be the potential of your brain and your thinking power? How fast you could get things done, how much more efficiently you could get things done with a clearer head, with better purpose, more clarity, communications are clearer. There's a lot of impact of this. There's so much application to using these strategies across all of your life. And so, you know, I want you guys to be thinking about it. I want you to have, as I said earlier, I want you to make your brain top of mind. And it's something that most of us don't do, and we're able to take it for granted. I think just for the very reason you said, like, I still can do all these things and I'm functioning great. Like, I'm still really successful. Okay. What I think is really important is, I mean, I kind of just said this, but this is really this is what we're focused on at Brain Health, is how is it that we get people to squeeze every single little ounce of mental advantage to maintain and improve all the things around us, from quality of life to business to our families and friends. This is really, it's where it matters the most. And I think that even if you think of none of this in the workspace because you feel like the way that you've been able to function successfully works for you, which I would challenge you to reevaluate on some occasion, but think about how you can adopt this into your own personal life. This is extremely important because you set an example as leaders, not just of the way you utilize your brain power, but also you are able to empower those around you at all levels. And all of us are leaders, whether we're all leaders in the workplace and in our personal lives. And so I really do implore you to think about that. Your 3 tools, once again, less is more. Do a deep dive and be a transformational thinker on something today. And with that something, be a perspective taker. So these 3 tools are not, I'm not asking you to do additional things. I'm just asking you to do what you normally do in a more strategic, with a more strategic use of your brain power. Does that make sense? Our goal is always continuous improvement. We want people to get out of their brains what they need and what they want. And so the way that you use your brain is very different than everyone else around you potentially. And so it's not, these same 3 principles apply across the board, but how we put them into play could potentially look very different. So with that, I wanted to thank you guys so much for being here today. I know that we have specific time for questions, and I would love to answer any questions that you guys have.
So there are a few questions that came up in the chat box, and some of that you sort of addressed, but you may have some additional input. The first one was, how does the quality of sleep affect brain health?
Sleep cannot be underscored. Sleep is really one of the great equalizers of our own cognitive potential. I think there's a lot of people that pride themselves on only needing, like, I only need 4 hours of sleep a night. No, like, we do need more. Until recently, actually, surprisingly, I did think, I had heard from a sleep researcher that we are hardwired for 7 to 9 hours of sleep. So I think everyone knows, like, you need 8 hours of sleep. You need 8 hours of sleep a night. And so then I would actually encourage you guys all, anyone who's interested in sleep, to look up Dr. Russell Foster. He's one of our collaborators in our big research study that we're launching, the Brain Health Project. He does a lot of sleep research, and he has talked about the fact that it's not really about the 7 to 9 hardwire. Everyone's a little bit different, but sleep cannot be underscored. We need more, probably everybody needs more sleep than you realize, and you need more sleep than you think you do. But you know, from your own kind of being your own citizen scientist, you know what happens when you don't get good sleep versus the days that you do. And when you have consecutive nights of great sleep, or a lot better sleep than what you maybe have had, it makes a huge difference in your energy, physical energy level and mental energy level, brain energy level.
I had a question relating to that. Now I've lost it, but I'll come back to it. Are there any websites or apps that help you, that you recommend that help kind of practice your frontal lobe?
Yes. So there's a lot of, when we talk about your frontal lobe is responsible, you know, we talked about some of the functions, the cognitive skills that your frontal lobe is responsible for. Some of those are what are referred to as integrated or top-down cognitive processing skills, like being strategic, being able to solve problems, being able to make decisions. Those are really complex cognitive tasks. There's other things that your frontal lobe is responsible for, like working memory, speed of processing. And these are the more specific cognitive skills that we need in order to be a top-down thinker. But those are called the bottom-up or more specific skills. So one program, if you're interested in computer games, is Brain HQ. Brain HQ is a good training program for the bottom-up skills. They're one of our partners right now. I will say this, I'm just going to put in a pitch for this for any of you guys who are interested. We just launched the Brain Health Project, and this is a 10-year longitudinal study that's all online. There's metrics that people take online. There's training that you do online. It's self-paced. There's a coaching aspect to it. But this is where you're learning different cognitive skills. There's a stress solutions aspect, there's a sleep aspect, and then there's adoption, continued engagement. And we're continuing to build more training modules, providing a huge, massive amount of brain health literacy. But I think one of the big advantages that a lot of people are interested in is metrics, and how can I continue to gauge and know how I'm doing. You know, our brains fluctuate all the time, and we've seen people, we launched our pilot at the start of COVID, and we have seen a really interesting people, both who settled in well at the beginning of COVID, and then the longer this goes on, the more difficult things have become for them. And then we've seen it the other way. We've seen people sleep, and people make tremendous improvements in their sleep. So I think that's something else to check out. And you could, I think the website is, I should know it exactly, but thebrainhealthproject.com, or you could find it on centerforbrainhealth.com, our website. So if you're interested in being part of a study, that's one of the things that we're doing.
I think I found that and kind of messed with it a little bit. It was kind of fun. Okay, here is another one. This goes along the same line. Are there any additional resources or literature on this topic that you would recommend? So you've already addressed that. The next question, what do you think of neurofeedback for brain health?
I think that depending on what your goals are, and making sure that the practitioner who is administering that and is responsible for that, thank you, Lindsay. I think is making sure that you're just matched up with goals and expectation management. I don't do neurofeedback, but I've talked to a lot of people, and I'm familiar with it enough to know that I think the biggest, most important part is it can be of extreme benefit as long as expectation management and making sure that the practitioner who is administering this knows what you're trying to go for.
Excellent. Next question. We spoke a lot about distractions and cognitive impact of those distractions. Any recommendations or tips to strengthen the ability to focus?
Surprisingly, the more that you filter out distractions, the better you are at filtering out distractions. So when we talked about, there was the question about how long, what's a good amount of time to be having focused work. If one of the reasons that we talk about 45-minute chunks of time is reality is that we will be interrupted and distracted by certain things. If you were to look at the tasks that you have at hand and you were to say, I know if I could do this without being interrupted and distracted, that it would only take me 20 minutes. You dedicate yourself with door closed, you're isolated from people, you turn off your phone, you are not accessible for 20 minutes and you focus on your work. That is building a very good filter system against distractions and interruptions. So being better at dealing with distractions and interruptions, we don't train it by being in distractions and interruptions, which may seem like that might be the more intuitive thing. That's not the way it works. So even if it may seem counterintuitive, the more that you work without those external stimulus around you, the better you're going to be able to deal with interruptions and distractions and filter them out.
Good. I'm going to take that one to heart. Stephanie from AT&T, she has a question. She had to drop, but I can pass this on to her. But her question was, she'd like to hear how nutrition affects brain health.
That is just, it's so big. I think, first of all, it absolutely does, but it is not very clearly understood. I mean, still, there's lots of diets out there. Nutrition is largely, I think when we have a lot of nutrition recommendations that are related to brain, they are largely centered around prevention of Alzheimer's disease. So that's what we know the most about. Mediterranean diet seems to be a very healthy diet. Again, it has been studied mainly in the prevention of Alzheimer's disease, or the protection, I should say, not prevention of, but more like the protection against Alzheimer's disease. Nutrition is not just, it's not just an easy answer. What I can say is that eating things that are rich in folic acid and antioxidants, kind of like back to like grandma's plate of very colorful foods. Berries are really good. Spinach and kale, blueberries especially. Blueberries is one of those things that keeps coming up as being very protective. You know, I think things in moderation. When we eat, also to know what is heart healthy is what is brain healthy. When we eat a lot of high fat foods, we tend to worry about our own, you know, our cholesterol buildup in our arteries. And most of the time, everyone just thinks about it from the neck down, like what it's doing to my heart. We can have the same kind of inflammation in our brain. And so I would say some general rule of thumb is what's heart healthy is what's brain healthy. We need a lot more research to actually tie to what is going to keep us healthiest, because the truth is still is that most of these recommendations are focused around disease prevention or protection, but not just about. And so if you were to take it, extrapolate that, Mediterranean diet, what's heart healthy is brain healthy, go for berries, dark chocolate's always better than milk chocolate, a little bit of red wine is better than a lot of white wine.
That makes sense. So along that same line, there's a lot of supplements that supposedly help your brain, like Prevagen, for instance. Do you recommend any of those or anything specific?
I think there hasn't been a lot of definitive research. The only kind of supplement that I've seen that has been written about again and again as being actually protective is, I think it's DHA, which is what's found in baby formula. So it's something that helps with I think most adults, if you're familiar with DHA, we think about it as being protective for our eye health and development of vision. I couldn't even start to I would not even start to recommend like, how do I take that and where do I take that and where do I get that?
Mm-hmm.
But there's an idea that I think there's a lot of things out there that are, there's a lot of supplements that, you know, the FDA doesn't regulate them. And I think to me, the more concerning thing is if people are taking other medications, prescription medications, and then we start taking a lot of supplements, if you don't have a good physician who is aware of everything you're taking, we don't really understand, it's not well understood about what the interactive effects are of
Right.
these things, right? So that's kind of the bigger thing for me, from my perspective, from a brain health perspective.
I think, let me see if there's anything else here. Yeah, Sharon asked about vitamins as well. What about people that have a family history of dementia?
So what I think is very interesting is family history of dementia, and let's talk specifically about Alzheimer's disease for a second, right? Alzheimer's disease is the most prevalent form of dementia. At age 65, the general average person has about a 1 to 2% risk chance of developing Alzheimer's disease. And certainly still the number one risk factor is age for Alzheimer's disease. As we, every 5 years after 65, that chance of developing Alzheimer's disease can potentially double. So by the time we're 85, like it's almost like 50% of people are at risk. What I find to be really interesting is that's on the average. There are many people who are diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease that are younger, they could be in their late 50s or early 60s. That tends to have more of a genetic, hereditary component to it than individuals who develop Alzheimer's disease, let's say their late 60s, 70s, for example. And still most people do develop it in their late 60s, 70s, and older than that. So that's one thing. Another thing is that until recently, I was sharing this with Rich yesterday, that after the age of 50, what you do has a greater impact on your health than genetics alone. Then I heard a talk, I would look this guy up too, Dr. Rudy Tanzi, T-A-N-Z-I. He does a lot of Alzheimer's research. I just heard a talk that he gave on Tuesday, and I don't remember the percentage he said, but what he did say was it was higher than 50%. That there's like, it's in the 60s and above, is that the way that we live our life has, let's just say, was 68%. That your lifestyle choices are like a 68%, or like the 68 scale has a bigger impact than just genetics alone. So now what we're starting to understand, what that's telling me is that we're starting to understand lifestyle factors a lot more, and what you do in terms of exercise, in terms of sleep, in terms of stress management, nutrition, social interactions and relationships, and the way you use your brain, cognitive, having purpose, all of those things really matter so much. So it's not like we're safe just because we have family history, but also we're not necessarily doomed to that fate.
That's really interesting that you say that, because I've noticed in some of the, during this COVID, where there's a lot of people that are isolated, older populations, my parents, for instance, they've been very isolated. They don't seem to be as cognitively aware. You know, my dad is 84, my mom's 80, and they so isolated, and I've just noticed that they've declined. So we're trying to get them more active, at least on video, so they can have more interaction in this isolation.
Yeah, social isolation has a huge impact. The older we get, the more important it is. And it doesn't mean you have to have 50 friends. It means that you have to have a good handful, like 5 people that you can rely on and have deep relationships with. Yeah.
I think we have a couple more minutes. I think the last question that I have personally, how does like brain fog happen? What causes that? Is it hormones? Is it, sleep deprivation? All of the above. As some of us age, get into your 50s, we have a brain fog, and I'm just curious what that is.
I think that it's all of those things. I think there's not just one thing. Definitely hormones play a factor, but being overwhelmed and not sleeping well, and even I don't think a lot of us are aware of sometimes the social pressures or the kind of the stressors that we carry with us. Those things that you just think, stress, one thing I want to just say about stress is interesting to me because it's a perception. The way that we define stress is it is the perception that the demands placed upon you exceed your ability to cope with them. And so it's very relative. And so a lot of us are not cognizant. We don't realize, especially when it's insidious. And it's like, I think, I can handle this. And then all of a sudden you feel like, one more thing on top of me and I can't handle it. What happened? And so I think all of these things, to your point, Lori, I think it's not just one thing that contributes, but I know you can have brain fog if you don't sleep well for a whole week. it can be muddy. If you are really stressed about something, you can be really foggy. If you've had an argument with a loved one, somebody you care deeply about, or a colleague, and you don't like the state of that, of like where it's sitting, that distraction, you know, that mental distraction can cause a whole lot of havoc on the rest. So I think that there's a lot of things that play in.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said for trying to live a very drama-free life.
I agree.
And being able to accomplish things. So I think we're about ready to close up. Does anyone have any last minute comments or questions? I'm looking at a lot of the feedback on the chat, and everyone's like, whoa, this is such a great program. Thank you so much. So to everyone, we're going to try and do this on an annual basis. I think that it's extremely beneficial to all of us, our performance, our jobs, how we relate to everybody else, that it's important enough that we see a lot of value in this program. So thank you, Jennifer. Does anyone have any last things? Bill?
No, just to echo that, thank you very much. This was fascinating, and I think I've confirmed that this is being recorded, which is good news for all of us, that we can have access to it and share it with friends and family and coworkers. So, and I love the annual thought, Lori and Jen. Appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you guys thank you for having me, and thank you all for your time and questions and interest.
Yeah, thanks for the challenges and the things that we can do. So, and making it rather simple. Appreciate you.
I've made a whole list of notes of everything that I need to do. Start doing.
Yeah, if anyone has any additional questions after this, I'm always accessible. So you can just find me on our website, and I'm happy to respond.
Well,
Thank you,
awesome.
Jennifer.
Thank you.
Okay, well, everyone, enjoy the cool day and have a very productive rest of the day.
Thank you, guys.
That was really great. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.